Social threefolding is not just a momentary short-term solution. It's I believe it's based in what lives in the deepest longings and will impulses of the human being of our times. I would say this is one of the most important books that people who are concerned about the current social political situation can read today. And it's a must read for anyone
Mhm.
who cares about future generations. So this podcast series aims to make the book more accessible and relevant by providing what we hope will be interesting commentary and discussion. He proposed that our current unitary society be restructured into three independent autonomous areas: the economy, the right state, and the free cultural life. So, a decentralized idea. That is, how can we create a society, a healthy society, in which labor or the worker is given the full dignity they deserve, while at the same time capital can be developed in a way that leads to both prosperity and social justice for all.
Hi, welcome. So today I'm really excited to be talking about with Mike the core points of the social question. There's your beautiful book there that Mike has translated by Rudolf Steiner. And I haven't read it myself. I know a tiny little bit, but because of you, Mike, you've been spending a lot of time on this. I know that this has been important to you. How did you get started on this?
Well, yeah, so thank you, Linda. To get started, I'd like to welcome everyone to our new podcast series. And yeah, so the subject is social threefolding, and this is a really vast subject. I've been studying it for a long, long time, since I was a teenager, I would say, which was, if you from my appearance, you can tell was a long time ago. I I've written a book on this a related subject. My book is called Money for a Threefold Society. Um, and yeah, so it's something I've been very interested in for a long time. And what is social threefolding? Well, it's a kind of new concept for society and restructuring society, and we'll be talking about that maybe some more, I guess. I don't know if I'm answering your
Hmm.
question.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sort of wondering what made you interested in this. I know you're into you've studied Steiner and for a long, long time. And yeah, why is it specifically this social threefolding that is important or interesting to you?
Yeah, I guess part of it is a feeling that something isn't quite right with our society and the things that people have been doing and trying to do. Like, I think there's a problem with the capitalist system. I think there's a problem with socialism. And is there a way that we can find something better than those two choices? This was a question that arose for me really as a young person, seeing, I guess, in my sort of formative years as a teenager. And I encountered a guy in Saskatoon, where I come from, who introduced me to these ideas. And I have to say, the way this individual introduced it, it sounded more like socialism to me. And I have to be honest, I wasn't really that interested in it in the beginning.
Hmm.
But I found that the ideas, as I learned them, kind of grew on me, and they developed their own sort of, uh, um, I don't know what to say, their own independent value for me. And I
Hmm.
started thinking about them more independently. And I also tried to find ways where I could live my own life sort of in a threefold way. And, that had some mixed success. And eventually, I just got into reading and really focusing on what Rudolf Steiner, the founder of this, actually said about this. And I just found it more and more interesting as the more and more I understood it. It just seemed really like what is needed at our times today.
Hmm. And um, as I understand it, Mike, you're one of Canada's leading experts on the field of social threefolding. What is social threefolding for
Yeah.
people who don't know? And for people who might know exactly what it is, What are you bringing to the table, like that is different from what they might know?
So, yeah, I think it's a pretty small field. There are not very many people very that are really knowledgeable about it. I think there are very many people who know a little bit about it. And I think what we can do in this podcast series is help those people who know a little learn more. It
Hmm.
also we can also it's really though aimed at the beginner. So someone like yourself, Linda, who may not know anything about this, it's kind of like a journey we could go together and learning from the very beginning. So I'm
Hmm.
hoping that it's a little bit of something for everyone.
Hmm. Okay. I know it's a huge subject. It's like I can't even begin to understand the depth of this and just the little tiny bits that I've heard from you. I'm really struggling to hold the concepts together, and I think I'm beginning to understand a little bit, and I certainly was a little bit skeptical, a lot skeptical, let's just put it that way at first, as well, because I was a little bit worried about is this anything to do with socialism and, whatever. So what I've understood from you a little bit, and I'm probably, I don't know, saying this wrong, but it's maybe taking the best of all worlds. Yeah, can you expand on that? I don't know if you want to, or maybe we'll do that in a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a prepared introduction that I'll do, but maybe just in terms of preliminary remarks, it may seem really complicated at first, but a lot of things are complicated when you don't know them. Um, I often make the analogy, imagine that you lived in the Middle Ages and you had to explain to somebody how a credit card worked. I mean, they literally they don't know because it's something we understand today. We just maybe we don't know how it works, but we use them all the time.
Right.
Um, but someone who's not yet familiar has never used it before. It's really hard to explain it in words.
Mm,
And this is kind of the problem with social threefolding. I mean, we have instances of capitalism. We have lots of societies based on a capitalist private ownership framework. We also have instances of socialism that have existed and maybe still exist based on more social ownership frameworks. But
mhm.
we don't have an instance of social threefolding to point to. And so it's difficult to grasp only because it's unfamiliar. I
Right.
think once you get it, you get it. And it's not
Mhm,
that difficult, no more difficult than any other thing. But it's just we're not there. We don't have it yet. And so it's
mhm,
something more belonging to the future.
mhm.
And it's for the future generations. I think it's an um,
Ah,
important restructuring of society is how I would
mm.
describe it, that
Okay,
we
so
need to do.
when people say restructuring of society, I mean, I'm hearing you. You're sort of talking about doing something for the future generations so that I mean, right now, kids like growing up, what kind of hopes and dreams that they might have for ownership or living a life fulfilled. I wonder where that is, being a mom, it's a concern. So what I'm hearing is that you feel that this system could be something that we could grow into and shift into, and that would bring a better world about, hopefully. And then when I hear, things like kind of changing the system, one thinks of revolutions, and I certainly wouldn't want, and I know you definitely wouldn't want any kind of pain or suffering to occur because of change. And but are you talking about that kind of change, or are you talking about more sort of what kind of change would be needed in order to bring this about?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point. And again, I'm not an advocate of revolutionary change because, frankly, a lot of people get hurt, as you say, and then
Mm,
it often doesn't stay. Like
mm,
things will just go back to the way they were, or they might get even worse.
mm,
Revolutions aren't necessarily a permanent solution to things. They seem like a good idea at the time, maybe for some people, but I
Hmm.
think of it more like an evolution that we human beings are changing, and our society, it's like clothing, that our society, the way it's made, is doesn't fit us anymore. That
Hmm.
we've inherited a kind of social framework from hundreds of years ago or even thousands of years ago, and although we are changing, we want more freedom today, for example, and our society is not really built around individual freedom.
Hmm.
So how can we redesign or rethink and evolve social institutions to fit to meet us in our current needs? So
Hmm.
I think it's an outcome of our own impulses.
Hmm.
We have a kind of, there's a stirring, a kind of desire within us for this, but we don't have words for it.
Right.
And Rudolf Steiner has found a way to put this into words. And
Hmm.
it's these words that we want to learn together. So,
So you're basically speaking to the motivation of why anyone would want to pick up this book in the first place and
yeah.
and learn about social threefolding. I mean, for the vast majority of people who haven't heard of it, they're going to go, "What the heck is that?"
Mhm.
Right? And so, I guess and my hope as well is that, people will give some thought and some consideration to explore this a little bit with us as we're, exploring, as I'm exploring with you. you know?
So
So,
let me
mhm,
ask you a question, Linda. Who are
mhm.
you and what brings you to this podcast?
Oh, you know, I'm just a regular housewife slash psychotherapist, and I'm very what is really important to me is as to do whatever I can to bring in some compassion and love and if I can possibly contribute to bringing the world a little bit better. And if there's something that I can sort of help with in order to do that, I'm happy to do that. And I'm really a novice in this, and I have you to thank for my knowledge in Steiner a little bit at a time. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what unfolds with that, reading the book. But yeah, so I'm gonna sort of give you the floor if there's, you've got an introduction, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by way of introduction, so we've been talking for some time already, but
Mhm.
what is it that we're going to learn or talk about in this podcast series? Well, social threefolding is maybe you can think of it as a restructuring of society so that instead of a single unitary society, we have it sort of separates into three decentralized parts, we'll say, or areas of social life: the economy, the government or the state as such, and the free cultural life. And these three different structures or administrations or organisms or areas, I don't know what to say exactly, they will become a sort of, instead of a single society, our society becomes decentralized into these three different parts. And
Mhm.
then we can there's a huge advantage to doing this, we'll say. And it's really an idea that's worth exploring and learning about. It's not, I wouldn't say it's an answer to all of our problems, but it's a framework that could help us take the next step in evolution, I would say. So I guess that's my little summary. But in this particular podcast series, we're going to be discussing this book. You held it up already, the core points of the social question. Yeah. So this is a new translation that I have done recently, and it's kind of confusing, the title, because this is the title the author Rudolf Steiner gave it. He wrote this in German, and um, what is the social question and what are the core points of the social question? So
Mhm.
we don't really understand this today. We don't really talk about the social question, but 100 years ago, when this book was written in 1919, it was a big question that people were talking about. And it had to do with this question of the gap between the rich and the poor, or the working classes and the ruling classes. And there was,
Mhm.
at that time, quite a large wealth gap and a power gap. And I would say this question, the social question, still exists today, maybe in a different form, but I think the core principles and ideas of this book are still just as relevant today as they were in 1919, right after World War One. So
Mm,
that's what we'd like to do, or I'd like to do in this podcast series, is bring these ideas out of obscurity and make them more well known and
mhm.
accessible. All right.
Yeah. And if it's okay to ask the question, who is Rudolf Steiner for those that don't know and haven't heard of him before?
Yeah. Yeah, Rudolf Steiner, I just have it in my notes here, so I'll just pull it up. So he was
Mm.
born in Croatia, present-day Croatia,
Oh.
back in 1861. And at that time, that was a region under the Habsburg rule. And it shortly after that became part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the dual monarchy. But as a youth, young Rudolf Steiner, he studied science and philosophy. And not long after he received his PhD, he wrote a book, probably his most famous book, called The Philosophy of Freedom. And
Mhm.
this is one of my favorite books. It's a kind of philosophical handbook that describes how anyone can achieve genuine freedom of will. So later, at around age 40, he began to get involved with the German Theosophical Society, which had originally been founded by Madame Blavatsky in some years before. And around the turn of the century, this was like 1900. And so he gave lectures and he did research into theosophical things, and but he always insisted on his own independence. He insisted on his own individual freedom, and so all through his unique contributions to theosophy, he developed a kind of method for what he called spiritual science, and he describes the results of his own research into the unseen or the supersensible realms of existence.
Mhm.
And then sometime later, his independent streak kind of caught up with him, and he ended up having to leave the Theosophical Society, and he started his own group in 1913 called the Anthroposophical Society. And this was just before the outbreak of World War One. And at that time, there was a generous donor who gifted his group some land in Switzerland. And it turns out Switzerland was neutral during the war. And so they were able to work there without interference from the French and German war that was going on starting in 1914, just really not far from where they were. But they made an international headquarters there in Switzerland, and this allowed him to continue working on his research and his scientific research. And he gave many lectures to international groups of followers, even people that were at war with one another. He would welcome everyone. And then after the war, the Europe was quite devastated, and he took up the task of social threefolding, which it was sort of his main task for many years. And he wrote this book in April. He published it in April 1919, so a few months after the war ended. And this was part of a peace initiative that he wanted to bring about a new um, way for people to feel some of the social gaps and the social question, to resolve some of these issues with each other and to feel and to find a way forward.
Mhm.
So he also at the time started the Waldorf School out of this. It was a out of this movement. He believed very strongly in a new education system. And so in Stuttgart, Germany, he started the free Waldorf School.
Mhm.
And then a short time later, in the early 1920s, like 1922 or so, there was a lot of hyperinflation in Germany. The money system went out of control, and there was also the rise of violent national socialism, so-called national socialism in Germany. And so he found, a lot of difficulties, and he had to withdraw back to Switzerland. And then he eventually died in 1925. So his legacy was preserved by a group of people called the Rudolf Steiner Archive. And in the course of the 20th century, they compiled a very large collection of books and essays and lecture transcripts of his and other documents. And this is called his complete works, or in German, Gesamtausgabe. And there's
Mm,
about 40 books, essays, compilations, and about 3,700 lecture transcripts in
mm,
this collected works.
wow.
It's a very wide range of practical and esoteric topics. And this particular book that we're looking at is volume 23 of his complete works. It's also translated as Towards Social Renewal in the
Hmm.
old translation. So that's a little rundown of Steiner. Okay.
Okay. So I guess a question is coming up for me, and it's, it might be answered through, studying it, but also like kind of like how come they didn't pick up on what he was saying there and, you know, maybe they did. Maybe they tried it out or it's been over 100 years since. Like what has stopped the I guess people who know about Steiner and his social threefolding to successfully bring about this societal shift.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I don't know if there's a clear and definite answer to this question. I think some contributing factors might be that Steiner himself was stopped by the hyperinflation, by some of the political pressures, like I said, the growing National Socialist movement
Mm,
in Germany, and also, despite his best attempts, I think people just didn't really understand it.
mhm,
And he also expressed frustration at times that people didn't understand it. And I think part of it is a kind of new idea.
mhm,
And he spoke about and he speaks about in the book, we get a lot of our thinking from our existing institutions.
mhm,
And so the old is leading the future and instead of thinking something new. And he thought that after the war, for example, people would see that the old doesn't work.
mhm,
And you'd think um, that people would be open to something new, but I think out of fear, they when things are very chaotic, people tend to cling to the what they know, even if it's
mhm.
not the best. And
Right.
I think there's this tendency within the human being to when they're in times of fear to cling to what is known, and
Mhm,
it's hard to explore new ideas. And then when things are doing well, there's like no reason to explore new ideas. And so
mhm,
new ideas tend to not catch on,
mhm.
something like that. But I think it is something that we could learn about and then make our own decision if we want to pursue it or not. I think it's
Right.
very relevant today.
Mhm. Yeah, let's get reading. I'd love to start for sure. Thank you for the introduction and explanation. So, okay, so let's t take a look at the book, Mike, and start up the reading process so that we can share with the viewers as we go along.
Yeah, so I put on the screen here the cover,
Hmm.
the core points of the social question. And as I said, it was written in the German language by Rudolf Steiner, the author. I'm just the translator, okay? And it was published in Stuttgart in April 1919, a few months after the end of World War I, as I just said. Um, Now we have to have sort of transport our mind back to this time, and in order to understand the context of this book, the war was something new in the world. They had never seen a war on a global scale before. It was sometimes called the Great War or the war to end all wars,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
they thought that with this massive devastation, that it was something unbelievable, really, and the millions of people who died. And in the wake of these events, Steiner, he really sought to understand the social political situation. He wanted to bring forth new social ideas, and essentially, he proposed that our current unitary society be restructured, as I said before, into three independent autonomous areas: the economy, the right state, and the free cultural life. And so, that basically, instead of having a single leader, like a president or prime minister who's in charge of the whole society, you would have maybe decentralized areas, and each would have their own forms of leadership, not necessarily a single leader, and none of these would be in charge of everything. So a decentralized idea. And
Hmm.
each one of us, because we all participate in all three areas, we all participate in the economy, we all participate in this the rights life, the life of law and politics. We all participate in the cultural life, the life of abilities. Because of each human being participating in all three, the human being will bring it back together into a whole. So it will become a social unity, but at a higher level.
Hmm.
And this is called social threefolding. And this is what Steiner introduces in this book and explores in this book. And that's what we'll be talking about in this podcast series. So, yeah, as I said, let's go back into a little bit of history. Let's go back to the late 19th century, so the 1870s, 1880s. At this time, Germany in particular was in a process of rapid industrialization. So in the Central Europe, the advent of railroads, coal mining, steam engines, industrial factories, these had ushered in a new industrial age. And in the process, many members of the former peasant class who for centuries labored as serfs and on farms, they were brought into the cities, to the industrial centers where they were transformed into the working class,
Hmm.
which is sometimes somewhat degradingly referred to as the proletariat.
Right.
And so we have to call to mind how Dickensian life was for people. They, if you were born into the working class, you had basically no opportunity to own property. Your life consisted of just working for subsistence. You work every day just to earn enough to pay for your basic food, clothing, and shelter. That there weren't any labor laws that to speak of, really. Like later on, there were labor laws that would limit the length of the working day and the number of days in the work week, but that didn't exist back then. And so the labor conditions at the time were, I would say, dirty, dangerous, and degrading. And then came World War One. So they went from the working class, suddenly they were put in the trenches to fight or die. And millions did die, and many also returned with amputations and injuries that when they did come back, they couldn't even work. At least the hard labor wasn't even possible. So they were often devastated. And it was during this time that Marxism and the idea of communism really took hold of the working class. And as we know, in 1917, in the middle of the war, that's when Lenin and Trotsky staged their communist revolutions that led to the rising up of the Soviet Republic in Russia, later the Soviet Union. But in Germany, right after the war, a similar socialist revolution occurred. Maybe that's not as well known, starting in November 1918, and this socialist revolution was quickly put down by the ruling classes, by the people in power, sort of shut that down. So
Hmm.
we have to picture in those days how there was this really clear distinction between the working class and the ruling classes. The
Hmm.
ruling classes were the aristocracy, the military leadership, the wealthy property and capital owning industrialists, the merchants of the middle class, and sometimes these people were called the bourgeoisie.
Hmm.
And these ruling classes had a lot of control over the daily lives of working class people. And the working class, their lack of education kept them ignorant, their lack of means kept them immobile, and their lack of power kept them docile. So
Hmm.
there was this great gap, I would say a great divide between the
Hmm.
working class and the ruling class. We could also say between labor and capital. And this divide lies at the heart of what at the time was called the social question. So that's in the title of the book.
Hmm.
And so the social question and the core points that we're going to be Steiner addressed in this book, and it could be phrased something like this, yeah? How ought the working class and the ruling classes relate to one another in a healthy way? That is, how can we create a society, a healthy society, in which labor or the worker is given the full dignity they deserve, while at the same time capital can be developed in a way that leads to both prosperity and social justice for all? This is the question that is
Mhm.
addressed in this book. So I would say in the meantime, over the 20th century, a lot has changed. Even up to the present day, we've had a lot of labor laws and labor movements, and things are somewhat better, I would say. And the social question does not present itself in the same stark way that it did in 1919, but many aspects still remain unresolved today. And it might be
Mhm.
said that it's still relevant. And so I think, even though this book is linked to the historical situation at the time of 1919, the principles and ideas that it contains holds out promise to us today. And I think it's really worth studying as well. So yeah, I think it offers to look at or help us with many of our social ills or social problems, because social threefolding is not just a momentary short-term solution. It's I believe it's based in what lives in the deepest longings and will impulses of the human being of our times.
Mhm.
So I would say it's something positive and constructive. It's probably, I would say this is one of the most important books that people who are concerned about the current social political situation can read today. And it's a must read for anyone
Mhm.
who cares about future generations. So this podcast series aims to make the book more accessible and relevant by providing what we hope will be interesting commentary and discussion. Yeah, so that's my overview.
That's awesome. That's really great. Thank you, Mike. So, do you want to get started
Yeah,
reading?
absolutely. So I'm just going to
Okay.
skip a few pages here,
Mhm.
um, and we'll go to how about if this is the table of contents.
Mhm.
There's just quickly, there's I'll zoom in on it for us so we can see it better. Oops. There. Okay. So, yeah, I wrote a preface as translator, a short preface we'll read. There are two prefaces by Rudolf Steiner, one original and one that he added a year later in a new edition. And
Mhm.
then there are really four chapters and an appendix. So I think we'll probably look through the prefaces. We'll do the first chapter quickly, focus on the meat of it, which is chapters 2 and 3, and that's probably all we'll do, because a lot of it is historical and not that
Mhm.
relevant.
Mhm.
So I'm going to ask you, Linda, please, if you wouldn't mind reading the translator's preface.
Sure. I'm going to read from the book that I have here,
Yeah,
just so because my
absolutely.
eyes can't see that straight. All right. Okay. Translator's preface. The social question, which asks how the working class ought to relate to the ruling capitalist class, has changed significantly since Rudolf Steiner, 1861 to 1925, wrote this book in 1919. Okay. However, much that Steiner describes is still highly relevant to the present and future, and this book remains worthy of study. This translation has been crafted for careful readers. An attempt has been made to render Steiner's original German into English as accurately as possible, while still retaining clarity and fluency. In preparing this edition, Google Translation services were used extensively. However, all phrasing has been carefully considered by me, the human translator. Therefore, any errors or interpretations are my own. The prefaces have been arranged in chronological order, which differs from the composition of the original volume, published by the Rudolf Steiner Archive as Steiner's Collected Works number 23, CW23. Otherwise, this is a complete translation of all parts of his volume that are now in the public domain. To avoid sexist language, the singular form of they is used as a gender-neutral third-person pronoun. Also, the impersonal German pronoun "man" is most often translated using the English "we."
Okay. Thank you, Linda. Did you want to make any comments or questions about this?
Nope, it's very clear
Okay.
and concise. It's good.
Okay. So let's just move on. Um, the first preface was added to it was an introduction to the first edition of 1919. And I'll just give us an overview of the preface now.
Mm,
It's a relatively short preface that he wrote introducing the book, and about a year later in 1920, he he would go on to write a longer second preface for the new edition based on some of the feedback he got as well. So this one is really the original preface, what he thought he wanted to introduce the book.
mhm,
So in essence, the preface says something like this: In people don't really understand what is happening, at least not in any deep way. We must attempt to gain a greater awareness of the true nature of the current social unrest. So in addition to this awareness, we must also develop a goal-conscious social will. This is a very important phrase for him.
mhm,
Goal-conscious social will. If we would bring about effective social change. Once the underlying deeper longings of people are better understood, he says, the specific need for a new threefold restructuring of our whole society will also become clear. So that's the summary of the preface. Now
mhm,
let's read it. So I'm going to say that Steiner is not easy to read, in part because he wrote in German
mm,
and had a kind of academic style. Um, but at the same time, you know, we today we don't really read like people did 100 years ago.
mhm,
And so what I'd like to do is um, sort of preview each paragraph as we go and
mhm,
just kind of warm it up. So like I just did, what to expect, and then we can read it hopefully with more understanding, and then we can just discuss it, you and I, after. Okay?
mhm. Okay.
So here's a very brief warm up to this first paragraph, which is nearly a page long.
Mhm,
And so just this is basically something to think about before we read.
mhm,
Um, Today, that is in 1919, today we face many social challenges, societal challenges that our current institutions are unable to address. So we need new institutions and new ways forward. The author, that is Steiner, wishes to discuss how to link the current social demands of people to goal-conscious social will, independently of personal biases. We must acknowledge what is demanded today by the working class because this is a reality. World War I and its disastrous consequences resulted from a failure to apply social will to achieve what is necessary. Okay, so I'll have you read
mhm.
now, Linda.
Okay. So the title is Preliminary Remarks about the Intention of this book. Contemporary social life poses serious, comprehensive challenges. Within social life, demands for new institutions arise and show that in order to address these challenges, pathways must be sought that have not yet been considered. Supported by the facts of the present, someone might perhaps find an audience today, someone who, based on his life experiences, must confess his opinion that this lack of thinking about the pathways that have become necessary is what has led to social confusion. The statements in this book stand on the basis of such an opinion. They wish to speak about what ought to happen to bring the demands currently made by a large part of humanity onto the pathway of a goal-conscious social will. The formation of such a will depends little on whether one or another person likes or dislikes these demands. They are there and excuse me, they are there and we must reckon with them as facts of social life. This should be considered by those who, due to their personal life situation, find that the author of this book speaks of the proletarian demands in a way they do not like, because, in their opinion, this book points too one-sidedly to these demands as something that our social will must reckon with. The author, however, would like to speak from the full reality of contemporary life, as far as this is possible for him based on his knowledge of this life. He sees before his very eyes the disastrous consequences that must arise if we refuse to see the facts that have now arisen from modern human life, if we refuse to know anything about a social will that reckons with these facts. Hmm.
Okay. So did you understand that, Linda? Or is
I
that
did.
pretty
Yes.
dense? It's
No,
pretty
no,
dense, eh?
it's understandable just based on what you also started with. That sort of helped set the context. So I'm pretty clear on, he's saying that there is a big problem here. There's a large part of humanity that, is not okay with, being used and abused kind of thing.
Mhm.
And he's trying to find a different way. And he's saying it's really important. And even if we're not happy with, maybe he's kind of prefacing it with, hey, you might think I'm pointing too much on the proletarian, like, making the case for them more. You may not like that, but just, the intention is really to create something that is better for all, is what I'm hearing, and I might be reading into it.
No,
So,
great. I
yeah.
think you're understanding it very well. Yeah.
Mhm. Cool.
Yeah.
So,
And he closes the paragraph by saying something like, uh, it, we see before our very eyes, or the author sees the disastrous consequences that must arise. He's talking about the war.
mhm,
If we refuse to see the facts that have now arisen, if we refuse to know anything about a social will that
mhm,
reckons with these facts, and there's something about this need for a new kind of social will,
mhm,
and to recognize what is this social will, and then to transform it into something social and something goal conscious,
mhm,
so that it's not just anger, not just anything, but how can we structure this, our thinking around the society in a positive way?
mhm.
And that's kind of the thesis of this book. Yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So the next paragraph is quite long. It carries over from pages 3 to 4. And so
Mhm.
I'm gonna have you read, see this where I'm indicating there's a little dash.
Yep.
If you can just read, we'll just break it into two chunks, and I'll
Okay.
have you read the first chunk, but before you do that, I'm gonna just warm it up a little as I did,
Yep.
and
Mhm.
just sort of get you thinking in the direction that when you do hit the words, it will help maybe, yeah?
Okay.
So he's going to be saying something like, there are certain people who consider themselves practical, and these people may believe that the views presented in this book are impractical. Is it not true that the so-called practical people are the very ones who created the disaster of the war and its aftermath?
Mm,
Perhaps the practical people need to reevaluate what they believe. As a matter of fact, in social life, it is highly practical to work with social ideals and to address the cultural aspects of modern life. If we continue to ignore these social ideals, further mistakes could result.
mhm.
Okay?
Okay. So, those who consider themselves to be practical in life, according to the way we understand the idea of practical under the influence of many cherished habits today, will, first of all, be even less satisfied by the author's statements. They will say that the author of this book is not practical in life. However, the author believes it is precisely these people who will have thoroughly to relearn, because to him, their practical life appears as that which has been absolutely proved to be an error by the facts that contemporary humanity has had to experience, as the error that has led to disaster on an unlimited scale. They will have to realize that it is necessary to consider as practical some things that seemed to them to be wrong-headed idealism. They may believe the starting point of this book is wrong, because the first parts of it speak less about the economic life and more about the cultural life of modern humanity. The author must believe, from his knowledge of life, that in addition to the mistakes already made, countless others will be added if we do not decide to pay appropriate attention to the cultural life of modern humanity. Hmm.
Okay. So, do you have any thoughts you want to share about this?
Yeah, so help me if I'm misunderstanding. When he's speaking about practical people, it sounds like he's talking about the bourgeoisie, maybe, perhaps. People, I mean, it's interesting that he uses, you know, those who consider themselves to be practical in life. It's interesting that he's using that wording. And I can already feel within my system, certainly, the people that are capitalist in mindset, and certainly you know, anyone who has a business, anyone who sort of has worked hard to create a life for themselves might be taking this a little bit like, okay, you need to change your viewpoint. That's what I'm hearing, and that's what I'm sort of understanding, that they were wrong-headed, that you know, I guess, and the fact that he's saying, look, just because you would start at the economic life, and sort of you take, maybe you're sort of saying, why aren't you talking about the economic life and talking about the cultural life? I mean, what does that have to do with anything? So yeah, he's kind of already sort of pointing to, okay, there's some things that we need to rethink,
Mhm.
relearn. We need to realize that there are some changes, and we're not going to focus in on the economy before we sort of look at the cultural life. And I mean, I'm interested to understand what cultural life means and the extent of that, and why he's starting from that point of view versus the economic, which would be the thing that one would go to, at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot that you just said. I would say to start with the group he's talking about is the so-called practical people. I would include people like the military leadership, the aristocracy, the industrial leaders, but
Hmm.
also the bourgeoisie, which are the sort of middle class, the owners of businesses and merchants and things like that as
Hmm.
well. But the all the people that were involved in the political life of the day, the working
Okay.
class was not really part of that. Often they they only got I can't remember what year they universal male suffrage even happened that men got the right to vote. Usually the vote was only for the property class.
Oh, right.
And
Yeah.
so these are the people that were in charge of society, the so-called practical people, right?
Hmm.
And Steiner's basically saying, you had your chance and you made a war and it was really bad. And
Hmm.
maybe your practicalness isn't so practical, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so he's saying, I think he's saying we just kind of accept this
Hmm.
as if it was a fact that those who are involved in economics, who are successful in business,
Hmm.
they know much more about society than everyone
Hmm.
else. And
Hmm.
I think Steiner is pushing back on this and saying, maybe that's not quite true. And maybe it's these so-called practical people that maybe have to think things over.
Hmm.
And he's asserting that, and much of what he says in chapter one, Steiner, what he will write about is aimed at the cultural life. And he sees the fundamental problem with our society is actually arising from the cultural life. And
Hmm.
we'll have lots of opportunity to talk about that because it's a little bit mysterious, but interesting, very interesting viewpoint.
Hmm.
Because most people would assume our problems stem from economics.
Hmm.
And in chapter one, when we get there, he'll kind of dispel this idea.
Hmm. Okay.
So that's what he's sort of pointing to at this in this preface.
Okay.
So now let's try to finish unless you have anything else you want to add.
No, no, that's good.
let's finish this paragraph. We were about 50-50 here.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll warm up the last half by saying something like this. So, so on the one hand, we have people who consider themselves practical, and they may find this book to be too idealistic.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, there are also people who believe in the spirit and idealism, and they may also find this book to be dissatisfactory
Hmm.
because the author doesn't speak about a nebulous spiritual world, but only of a spiritual quality that is practical and
Hmm.
applied to real life. So those people who are overly focused on the spiritual may consider the views expressed here to be too unspiritual.
Hmm.
And in contrast to the practical people mentioned who are consider these same exact views to be too impractical. So it's kind of like a middle road, yeah, between
Hmm.
practicality and idealism or spirituality. This book effectively overcomes the disconnectedness of contemporary social life.
Hmm.
This disconnectedness between what is practical and what is ideal.
Hmm.
Okay, so let's
Yeah.
have a read.
Okay. So even those who always merely utter certain cliches in the most varied forms, that humanity ought to get over its devotion to purely material interests and turn to the spirit, to idealism, such people will not find any real satisfaction with what the author of this book says, because he does not think much of the mere reference to the spirit, of talking about a nebulous spiritual world. He can only recognize a spirituality that becomes the purpose in a human being's own life. This spiritual content proves itself to be just as effective in mastering the practical tasks of life as it is in forming a view of the world and of life that satisfies the needs of our souls. It does not matter whether we know or believe ourselves to know about spirituality. What matters is that even when we grasp the practical reality of life, our spirituality comes to light. Such a spirituality accompanies life's practical reality, not merely as a sideline reserved for our inner soul being. Thus, the statements in this book will probably seem too unspiritual to the spiritual ones and too out of touch to the practical ones. The author is of the view that he will be able to serve the life of the present time in his own way, precisely because he is not inclined to be out of touch like many people who consider themselves to be practical, and because he can grant no legitimacy to those who speak about spirit in a way that creates illusions about life out of words.
Okay, thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
I got sort of lost in the words there, but your preamble, your explanation, sort of to really that you shared was really helpful. Helped me to kind of understand without really, that one for some reason the words were might be my moment in my head. I don't know what was happening there, but your explanation really stands for me. We're not going to go into this nebulous sort of spiritual sort of and satisfy the people that are kind of idealists. And we're not going to sort of go into the like the practical and satisfy those people. We're taking a sort of center of the road
Mhm.
approach. There you go. That's that's what I understood from your explanation, not so much from what I read.
Now, I want to point out that Steiner, like I said in the before, that he was involved in the Theosophical Society for a long time, since
Hmm.
starting at about age 40 until, until he died. So 20 plus years he was involved in spiritual subjects and the
Hmm.
talking about the supersensible worlds and so on.
Hmm. Hmm.
Not his whole life, but he was kind of labeled with this, stamped by this association. And I think a lot of people think of Steiner as some kind of um, I don't know, spiritual figure, and that and I think what he's saying, and if you read this book, there's no mention of anything like this. This is the book contains nothing of oogly boogly, or it's purely down to earth
Right.
talking about society,
Hmm.
and I think this is quite important that the book is a he's writing directly to people, and you don't need to have any particular background in reading Steiner's other works to understand it. It's really directly about society, social problems, what we can do about it, capital, labor, things like that. And so even if people might be turned off by Steiner in a way because of he's associated with these other statements that
Hmm.
people consider religious, this
Hmm.
book contains nothing of that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So just to be aware.
Very cool. Note taken.
Okay.
Yes,
So should we go on?
let's go on.
So in the next paragraph, he talks about the social question, and I've mentioned this again previously. This is the question: How does the working class, how should the working class relate to the ruling classes? Now
Hmm.
he sees this social question as in a way three questions: a question of economics, a
Hmm.
question of rights, and a question of culture. In earlier times, social harmony was the result of social instincts. In modern times, however, we require this goal-conscious social will to create the harmony of society. Very often today, our social will is a jumble of old instincts and new will. So we have to overcome the old and create the new. A certain amount of goodwill is necessary to grasp the idea of social threefolding. That is, how is it possible to shape the economic, the rights, and cultural areas of social life appropriately for modern consciousness? We must steer clear of fanaticism and utopianism as we develop healthy and practical social ideals. Okay, so why don't you give
Okay,
this paragraph a read?
sure. And where are we ending? Are
Uh,
we ending
the
at the
whole
end
the
of
whole
the
paragraph,
whole
yeah.
thing? Okay, all right. In this book, the social question is discussed as an economic, rights, and cultural question. The author believes he recognizes how the true form of this question emerges from the demands of the economic, rights, and cultural areas. And only from this recognition can the impulses come from for a healthy configuration of these three areas of life within the social order. In older times of social evolution, social instincts ensured that these three areas were membered within overall social life in a way that corresponded to human nature at the time. At the present time of this evolution, we are faced with the necessity of striving for this membering through goal-conscious social will. Between those ancient times and the present, in those countries which initially come into consideration for such a will, there exists a jumble of old instincts and newer consciousness that is no longer capable of meeting the demands of contemporary humanity. In some of what we now consider to be goal-conscious social thinking, the old instincts still live on. This weakens this thinking in the face of the challenging facts. More extensively than many people imagine, we today must work our way out of what is no longer viable. How the life of the economic, rights, and cultural areas should shape themselves in the sense of the healthy social life demanded by the modern period can, in the author's opinion, only occur to someone who develops the goodwill to accept what has just been said. What the author believes he must say about such a necessary shaping is what he would like to submit to contemporary judgment in this book. The author would like to provide a stimulus for a pathway towards social goals that corresponds to the current reality and necessity of life, because he believes that only such striving can lead beyond fanaticism and utopianism in the area of social will.
Okay, great. Thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
Um, thoughts or comments?
Um, well, let me collect my thoughts for a second here. Yeah. Um, it's more for me, just basically recognizing that there needs to be a way to move through society. I mean, he's writing it in the early 1900s. So, and I kind of found myself really feeling, wow, this is present time necessary. You know, um, we, we must, especially this, we must work our way out of what is no longer viable. And, there's shifts that are needed in the way we think, but, both in the working class and the capitalist sort of business owners leadership, as you mentioned before. Um, yeah, we need to develop something that will and the goodwill of this, and the intention is really good to help include all of society, not just some of society. To uh, yeah, um,
So yeah, he's contrasting how things were in ancient times, and you have
mhm,
to think. I think of the ancient times, the pre-modern period. It could be the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, ancient Romans, but it could be the medieval period as well.
mhm,
And all over the world, not just in Western society, but there was always some kind of maybe religious core to it, a hierarchical core to it, and our society was structured around these hierarchies.
mhm,
And I think today we're looking for a new kind of different way. We want to find our way away, get away from these hierarchies and find a,
right,
I don't think they're compatible with human freedom. And I think, are sort of finding within ourselves a new interest, a new desire, longing for
mhm,
freedom. And
mhm,
this is just not compatible. But yet we don't know any new institutions, and so we cling to these old ideas, and we even fight for old institutions that aren't viable anymore. And
mhm,
so we're kind of asking the question here, what does what is really demanded in our modern period? And
mhm,
Steiner believes he has some idea, and that he talks about this in this book.
mhm. Very cool.
And at the end he uses these words fanaticism and utopianism.
Mhm,
And this is also something, we talked about revolution a little bit.
mhm,
Revolution is really built on fanaticism and utopianism. This kind of belief that if we just, we have some kind of imagined future society that's going to be so much better, and then we're
mhm,
just going to overthrow everything that exists and it's going to
mhm.
be great. Well, that doesn't tend to work out,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah.
So,
Thanks for that. Shall I
yeah,
read on?
so I'm going to
Mhm,
suggest that we're almost at the end of the preface,
mhm.
that we read the next two paragraphs as a group.
Okay.
Um, so I'll just warm that up again and say,
Mhm,
if the reader thinks that this book is utopian, they might want to consider how disconnected society has become from reality. So disconnected, in fact, that today even common sense is sometimes considered fanaticism.
mm.
Okay. Yeah, it's a statement that could be true today.
Today, yes.
Yeah. So often we confuse the practical with what is merely familiar, and what is abstract with what is merely unfamiliar. And those who are strongly tied to the views of one or another political party may also feel dissatisfied because the views presented here transcend party political agendas.
Mhm.
What is necessary in relation to social will is, after all, independent judgment.
Mhm.
Do you want to read those two paragraphs together?
Sure. The author would like to ask anyone who finds anything utopian in this book to consider how strongly we have become removed from real life and have fallen into fanaticism nowadays with some of the ideas we have about a possible evolution of social conditions. That is why what is drawn from true reality and life experience, as has been attempted in the presentation of this book, is seen as utopian. For this reason, some will see something abstract in this presentation because only what they are used to thinking is concrete to them. And the concrete is also abstract if they are not used to thinking it. The author is aware that heads tightly clamped into party programs will be initially dissatisfied with his statements. He believes, however, that many party people will quickly become convinced that the facts of social evolution have already long outgrown party programs, and that independent of such programs, a judgment about the immediate goals of social will is necessary above all. Rudolf Steiner, early April 1919.
Okay, great. And there's also a note that Steiner adds. So this note, I'll say, was added to the 1920 edition,
Hmm.
and it was the footnote is actually at the end of the second last paragraph there.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we'll just read that as well,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
The, the author has consciously avoided strictly adhering to the expressions commonly used in economics literature. He knows exactly which places an expert judge will say are amateurish. His style of expression was determined not only by the fact that he also wanted to speak to people who were unfamiliar with the literature of economics and social sciences, but above all by the view that a future time would make most of what is considered expert in this literature seem one-sided and inadequate, even in its form of expression. Whoever may believe that the author should also have referred to the social ideas of others, which in one way or another seem to echo what is presented here, I would ask them to consider that the starting points and the pathways of the view described here, which the author believes he owes to decades of life experience, are the essence of the practical realization of the given impulses and not merely thoughts of one kind or another. Also, as can be seen from section 4, the author has already tried to work toward the practical realization of these ideas at a time when seemingly similar thoughts regarding one thing or another had not yet been noticed.
Okay. So in a nutshell, he's basically saying that he could have spent more time making it more connected. He
Mhm.
had the knowledge to
Mhm.
link it to contemporary thinkers but I think he wanted it to be a little bit timeless.
Mhm.
And in fact, if you look at the subtitle of the book, it's
Mhm.
the core points of the social question in the necessities of life of the present and future.
Mhm.
So he was not only writing to people of his time, but he was writing also to people of our time. And
Right.
and so he intentionally limited his it is kind of bound to his time, but
Mhm.
he limited that so that it was a little more focused on the principles that we could also draw in future times, like now.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. Very cool.
So yeah, going back to the original last two paragraphs, um, he's basically saying that um, yeah, people confuse. People will say, "Oh, that's abstract," when really
Mhm.
it's just unfamiliar, or
Mhm.
they say that's concrete, even and mean it's just familiar to them.
Mhm.
And so the notion of what is abstract, what is concrete is confusing if we're talking about new ideas.
Yeah.
And he says that he's not going to be addressing political programs or political parties, right?
Mhm.
So do you have thoughts about any of this?
Well, I think sort of addressing the people that might object to, very, very well, sort of, here's one-sided way of thinking, here's another sided way of thinking. And also, if you're belonging to this political party or that way, I'm not going to be using the language that is in the economics because I want everyone, as many people to understand and not be limited to this time, but also to the future. So he's really including everyone, is what I'm sort of getting here from this. And, not stuck in an ideology of one sort or another, which is it's refreshing actually, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And so many people, and with all the best intentions, are writing books today, and they're trying to make it relevant to today, will
Mhm,
wrap their thoughts into current things, and then in
mhm.
10 years or 20 years, it just seems antiquated.
Yes.
And I find this book is not like that. It's
Hmm.
even though it has some elements, I'm not going to deny, it fundamentally it is very refreshing even for
Hmm.
today's standards.
Yeah. Yeah. There's lots in there that already that you feel, okay, he's talking about today. It's like we
Yeah.
haven't changed. How did we make it out of the cavemen? We're still, there's still stuff we're grappling with, but yeah, for sure. It's a good start, I would say.
Yeah. So that's where we're going to end today. Next time we will begin the second preface or the new preface to the 1920 edition. So he had written the book, he published it, he circulated it, he had conversations, got some feedback, and then he thought, oh, I better articulate this a little more. It wasn't clear in the book. So
Right.
we're really going to start a little bit into the content in this second preface next time.
Okay. Sounds good. I look forward to it.
Okay, well, uh, thank you, Linda, and
Thank you.
see you next time.
See you next time.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit like and subscribe.